In his podcast, The Problem with Jon Stewart, there's only one, he did have a pretty good insight on the media coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I thought, and how it morphed very quickly into reporting what was happening and at whose hands it was happening to taking a position. Listen to Stewart's observations.
So what happens, I think, especially with the 24-hour cable networks, is they find their narratives. And then, so when the invasion first occurred, it was an all hands on deck, 24-hour eyewitness. The bravery was incredible. They lost the entire right-left polarity of coverage. Punditry went out the window. It was just about brave people on the ground and those who were expert in conflict in the studio. And they would have conversations about what was actually happening. But it doesn't take long for mission creep to set in with journalists who then become this is a siege. And a siege is by its very nature static. And the carnage is unspeakable. But it is the same. And journalists want movement. They want action. And as you're watching, I looked at that. I think The Intercept sent something out. It was the White House correspondents that are all like, would you bomb them if they touched Poland? How about this? Would you bomb them if they had a drone? Okay. Let's look at it this way. What would it take for you to bomb them? How about bombing them? We have a question for you. Bombs. What about those? Mm-hmm. It's no longer about this is what's happening. There's still some of that, but you see the story start to move on into speculation. What would happen? What would it take for this? What if Putin got killed? What if we killed Putin? What if we went in and poisoned, and that's the part where you realize they're trapped in a business model that creates news as narratives. It's one thing to tell stories. It's another thing to direct them.
I think that's a very good observation. And you know who falls prey to that right after the media does? Politicians.
Right.
And thus you have them competing with one another to out-hyperbolize Zelensky and Putin both so that they can get on those talk shows and get some airtime. And the sort of the sober realpolitik analysis of the situation from America's strategic interests gets subordinated, not by all, but by many, to the media-induced zeitgeist, which begets the virtue signaling among the populace, and it becomes this self-reinforcing echo chamber. It's dangerous because it can push people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do that could have catastrophic impacts. The madness of crowds that we saw in COVID is not limited to COVID. More on this. We're pleased to be joined by Peter Zwack. He's a retired U.S. Army Brigadier General and author of Swimming the Volga, a U.S. Army officer's experiences in pre-Putin Russia. General Zwack, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Dan, for bringing me on. I am a Chicagoland youth, and it's an honor to talk to you and to your listeners.
Well, it's great to have you on. What about what Jon Stewart had to say about how quickly the reporting and thus the discussion, not just on cable news desks, but then how that bleeds into the policymaking arenas, the halls of power, how that happens? Does that concern you at all? Some of the overheated, enthusiastic, bellicose rhetoric from Republicans and Democrats alike?
It is a great point. I was listening and pondering this very, very issue. And what happens, I think, in these situations, these crisis situations, it looked like initially everybody was pulling together, but as this thing draws out, this awful invasion and occupation and everything we've been watching, it's also very, very polarizing. and people start to develop positions, agenda. Do we intervene? Do we not? How do we intervene? And how do we do it? How do we work with NATO? And then of course how this blows back in our own, as Jon Stewart mentioned, our political narrative that now develops a force and momentum of its own and takes us away, as you mentioned, Dan, from realpolitik, meaning that really working through the issues methodically and carefully, because if ever we need to be careful, and I'm all in making the Russians pay for this from a global perspective, not just a U.S. only perspective, but we have to be so careful because of what we know from history and how narrative and hyperbole and passion and ego and emotion could lead us into a really, really ugly cul-de-sac that nobody wants.
I note that from a piece on some of your comments on the topic that you're at the Kennan Institute, and I wonder if some of the criticisms of the West in moving too far west too fast that precipitated Putin's effort to fulfill his revanchist dreams, if that is violative of George Kennan's policy of containment, which was so dominant in terms of the approach to the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Yeah, no, you are unbelievably well informed, and that's a quite nuanced question. And George Kennan, as you basically have mentioned, was against a enlargement of North Atlantic Treaty Organization to the east for the reasons that of inflaming at this point a broken Soviet Union, a new Russia that was trying to find its way. And I get that. And I was on the joint staff at the time as a young NATO with the countries of Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary in my portfolio. And I'll just offer this. And you're an historian, and many out there, and many Chicagoans, because of so many links of countries in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. Eastern Europe, where Poland mostly where NATO, these were the lands in between. The time immemorial, for generations, centuries, were caught by conquest, invasion, Holocaust, east, west, north, south, and desperately, after the breakup of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, wanted finally in their history to be part of a security arrangement that was credible. And that was what the NATO experience was. It took 8 years, friends, between 1991 and the breakup of the Soviet Union until 1999, when the first 3 new Eastern European nations joined NATO. So this wasn't a slam dunk. And it took a lot of work and a lot of politics and not just in our country, but in Europe for it to happen. So I believe it was a righteous thing. First, to bring peace and stability finally to Europe that had just endured 2 horrific world wars and a Cold War, and at the same time there were bridges thrown out to the Russians. Now these bridges were not about joining NATO, but having a better and more cooperative arrangement for the discussion. Well, we should have brought in Russia into NATO. Then is NATO, including the United States, willing to take a defense for one as a defense for all, with Russia's vast borders to include Central Asia and even China? So it's complicated, but the whole NATO enlargement expansion piece was as much about stability in Europe, where there's been no conflict other than Cyprus in 1974 within NATO nations. So I'm on board that NATO is right. Here's the challenge. I'll stop here. Ukraine is desperate to be part of that security arrangement for the very reasons that we're seeing right now. Of course, that plays into the dimmest Russian views, who remember 85 years ago the Nazis coming out from Central Europe, through Eastern Europe, and into the Soviet Union, and 20 to 26 million Soviets die, including many Ukrainians. So this is complicated. Thank you for the question.
And how long this? We had one guest on saying that this war could go on for years, possibly decades. Do you see that happening?
I don't think so. I think that there is a negative momentum if the West, and it isn't just the U.S. and NATO, friends. I say we can't call it U.S. NATO only. This is really Europe, all of Europe, including Switzerland and Sweden. It's also the like-minded world of nations that just see this move toward autocracy in the world, and that's a global phenomenon. And this has become the catalyst for all of it. So the fight, if you will, and we can define the word fight, the struggle for Ukraine to survive is much bigger than just that. Yes, I don't believe it'll go indefinitely because I don't think, faced with the slow breakdown of the Russian information firewall, that when the truth comes of the monstrous aggression that just occurred on the 24th of February, I mean, this is an invasion, and we have a lot of Poles of Chicagoans of Polish descent. That was the big invasion that presaged the Second World War with the Nazis, and this is the scale of that. So I think that the momentum of this, and you see already the cracks in Russia already on this. This is going to create enormous stress for the Russians. And I think the regime is going to have to figure a way out, or it's going down in the ash heap of history. But it could be long, not long, but it will take longer. The tragedy is it's being fought over the backs and the bodies of innocent Ukrainians. And while we and NATO and Europe and all are doing all we can, we have to be so careful about being drawn into a shooting conflict with Russia, then gives the Russians the narrative. You see, this was a U.S. NATO thing all along. However, the scary point will be if the Russians, because they are an extremist, decide to up the ante with a chemical, or God forbid, I don't think they'll do it, but it's in their capability if they're desperate, a tactical nuclear strike.
Well, we're talking to retired Brigadier General Peter Zwack. General Zwack served as the U.S. Defense Attaché in the Moscow Embassy from 2012 to 2014, among other posts. And I wonder, given your experience there, whether you believe this report out that there may be a palace coup afoot against Putin, I'm talking. The report that perhaps there are parties within his inner circle that would seek to take him out and install a guy he served with in the KGB, who's now the intelligence director, this guy Bortnikov. Do you think that's real, or is that just Western agitprop?
I think it's all of it. But this is, you've been at it a long time, as I and a lot of your listeners. Remember that term Kreminology back in the Cold War? I think that's alive and well. It's emerging because I think what Putin has done, and you've read it in the news as I have, is he has actually gone out and embarrassed members of his intelligence apparatus. And arrested recently people linked to their National Guard, which is sort of the Praetorian Guard. So these people, first of all, they're hard people. They are, in their minds, patriotic Russians, and they were drinking the Putin Kool-Aid, restore the dominance of the Soviet Union. It doesn't mean occupying all the lands, but the dominance and how and sort of the aura of the old Soviet Union, Imperial Russia, all that, Greater Russia. But what else are these? What these people are also the opportunists, or else they wouldn't be where they are, and they're also survivors, or else they wouldn't be where they are. And while they're working with a pseudo, the regime puts these trappings of being democratic and all that. In many ways, he's a new age czar, but runs the place like a mafia crime boss. So loyalty, back and forth, patronage, access to wealth. Well, that's kind of stripped away a lot in the last few weeks. And he's now gone out and called some of them out. So you just look at those images of Putin in the palace, sitting at the edge of the table, and the rest of his people are, 30 yards away. It's very Byzantine. It's very, and the fact that the word is out, whether it is disinformation, it's got to be on Putin's mind. Now, that in part is a good thing. However, it could also be a very, very dangerous thing.
Further destabilizing him.
He develops a siege mentality.
Yeah.
Who knows where this could all go, and he does have nukes.
He is Peter Zwack, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General, author of Swimming the Volga, a U.S. Army officer's experiences in pre-Putin Russia. General Zwack, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Could I ask can I have 15 seconds?
Sure.
I want to just thank Chicago and the St. Nicholas Cathedral School.
Okay.
Apparently brought in students from 4 schools just yesterday or the day before to do a ceremony in commemoration for Ukraine in your Ukrainian village. That's gone viral, and just good on Chicago, good on them.
Oh, very good. Yeah, very good.
Go Bears, go Blackhawks. Forgive me, White Sox fans, go Cubs.
Okay,
right.
just
All
this
right.
once.
Yeah, I should have stopped at St. Nick's. All right, go ahead.
All right,
you.
God bless.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Hey, it's Sean Thompson. Summer is just around the corner. Time to get ready for Memorial Day and backyard barbecues. My good friends